Nityananda. This is KAILASA's official response to Ahora El Pueblo. I address you on behalf of KAILASA regarding your recent articles that systematically misrepresent our sovereign nation, our diplomatic efforts, and our humanitarian mission, while simultaneously undermining the sovereignty of indigenous nations in Bolivia. For a publication named Ahora El Pueblo, your reporting demonstrates a concerning lack of interest in the actual communities affected by your words. The irony isn't lost on us that a media outlet serving the local people seems so determined to conjure entire populations out of existence through journalistic sleight of hand. You've declared KAILASA a fictional nation, with the confidence of a child insisting their imaginary friend deserves a seat at the dinner table. How fascinating that you've devoted an entire article to something you claim doesn't exist. That's quite a word count for a hallucination, isn't it? KAILASA isn't a recent invention. It is the revival of ancient Hindu sovereign states and ecclesiastical institutions with documented unbroken succession spanning thousands of years. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is the 203rd sovereign in a lineage with historical roots that were flourishing while many recognized nations were still figuring out the wheel. The Montevideo Convention of 1933 explicitly states that the political existence of the state is independent of recognition by other states. This isn't just our opinion, it's binding international law. Your apparent belief that nations spring into existence only when blessed by former colonial powers is not just wrong, it's just ridiculously outdated. So ask yourself, would you describe Taiwan as fictional? Kosovo? Palestine? The Sovereign Order of Malta maintains diplomatic relations with 112 countries, despite having no territory. Are they fictional too? You claim KAILASA is not recognized as a state by any actor in the international community within the framework of the 1961 Vienna Convention. This statement reveals a legal understanding so profoundly confused, it would make first-year law students wince in sympathetic embarrassment. The Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations doesn't establish criteria for statehood. It codifies diplomatic privileges and immunities. Citing as a basis of state recognition is like using a cookbook to diagnose a medical condition. You're holding the wrong manual entirely. KAILASA fulfills all four criteria of statehood established in the Montevideo Convention with flying colors. We have a permanent population. We maintain a defined territory. We have an established government. And we clearly demonstrate capacity for international relations. While claiming to merely report government statements, your articles actively undermine indigenous rights with the precision of a colonial administrator dividing territories on a map. By framing KAILASA as fictitious or alleged, you delegitimize not only our nation, but also the indigenous communities who have exercised their constitutional right to enter into international partnerships. Bolivia's plurinational constitution explicitly recognizes indigenous self-governance as a fundamental principle of the state, a document that you seem to have skimmed with the attention span of a goldfish. Article 30, Section 2.4 guarantees indigenous people the right to self-determination and territoriality, while Article 30, Section 2.5 ensures their right to maintain their own institutions. It appears that your concern for indigenous rights evaporates faster than morning dew when indigenous communities exercise those rights in ways that don't fit your preconceived notions. Thus, this selective application of principles is as transparent as your attempts at serious journalism. Your failure to include perspectives from indigenous leaders whose sovereignty you so casually dismiss speaks volumes, and none of those volumes would make for flattering reading. Your dismissive "the origins are Hindu" comment speaks volumes about your publication's biases. Would you summarize the Vatican as its origins are Catholic and consider your journalistic duty fulfilled? Or is it reductionism reserved for traditions that don't originate from your preferred hemisphere. This isn't just a sloppy journalism, this is cultural erasure dressed up as reporting and accessorized with prejudice. You've chosen to repeat tired falsehoods about the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism with all the investigative rigor of a gossip column, while conveniently omitting his complete exoneration by the United States Federal Court, which ruled in his favor and fined the false accusers nearly $500,000. See United States District Court of Southern District of Ohio, case number 2, 13-CV-00526. Despite nearly 15 years of malicious prosecution in India, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has never been convicted of any crime. A fact you might have discovered had you engaged in that quaint journalistic practice known as research. 11 medical experts have confirmed his physical condition makes him incapable of committing the alleged crimes. Multiple international human rights experts, including former UN Justice Council jurist Jeffrey Robertson, KC, have confirmed that the prosecution has devolved into persecution. Your silence on these established legal facts speaks louder than your accusations ever could. It's practically shouting through a megaphone. You've characterized legitimate diplomatic agreements between sovereign entities as suspicious, with all the nuances of a medieval witch hunt. All our agreements with indigenous nations include the explicit provisions, payment effectuated after ratification by competent authorities, thus ensuring full compliance with Bolivian law number 465 and ILO Convention 169. The implication that indigenous leaders lack the capacity to enter into international agreements isn't just an insult to KAILASA, it's a patronizing dismissal worthy of a 19th century colonial administrator. These agreements focus on preserving indigenous cultural heritage, not exactly villainous, protecting biodiversity in ancestral territories, scandalous, supporting sustainable development initiatives, how dare we, and documenting and preserving endangered knowledge systems. The horror. The time frame reflects the long-term commitment needed for effective environmental stewardship, not some nefarious global conspiracy. Long-term conservation agreements are standard practice globally, recognized by international environmental law, and only suspicious to those whose historical understanding stopped at yesterday. Your claim that KAILASA managed to sneak into United Nations sessions deserves a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. What's next? We use an invisibility cloak and magic password. KAILASA participated openly and transparently in these international forums according to established protocols. Hardly the behavior of international interlopers. Your shock that Hindu representatives might participate in international forums reveals more about your biases than Spider-Man's secret identity reveals about Peter Parker. Your reporting completely ignores the historical context of Hindu genocide and ethnocide, one of history's most overlooked atrocities, with the historical sensitivity of someone who believes history began when they were born. There were once 50 indigenous Hindu nations spanning 6 million square kilometers across Asia, with 10,000 indigenous traditions across 1,700 Hindu provinces and 200 Hindu kingdoms. However, centuries of violence has led to hundreds of millions of Hindus being massacred, apparently not newsworthy to you. Millions have been enslaved, orchestrated famines killing over 160 million people, and destruction of thousands of temples, over 1 million educational institutions, and 80 million texts. The very cultural erasure that you are now continuing. Today, only a small fraction of these indigenous Hindu traditions endure, with all Hindu sovereign lands having been unlawfully annexed, leading to forced mass exodus of indigenous Hindus. KAILASA represents the preservation of traditions that colonizers try to eradicate. By delegitimizing KAILASA, you're not just attacking a modern entity, you're continuing centuries of erasure against indigenous Hindu heritage with the calculated precision of colonial predecessors. Your reporting fails every principle of ethical journalism with the thoroughness of a student determined to score 0 on the exam. Let's have a look at the truth. You've omitted crucial facts and misrepresented basic legal principles with impressive dedication. Independence. Your bias against indigenous self-governance is so transparent it could be used as a window. Fairness. You've excluded KAILASA's perspective and, tellingly, the voices of indigenous leaders with surgical precision. Humanity. Your dismissive language dehumanizes both KAILASA citizens and indigenous communities with remarkable efficiency. Accountability. Your unwillingness to correct obvious errors reveals a concerning lack of journalistic integrity that would make tabloids blush. Your articles don't just fail journalistic standards, they violate Bolivian law with enthusiasm of a bull in a china shop. Article 4 guarantees freedom of religion and spiritual beliefs in accordance with worldviews. Article 21.3 enshrines the right to freedom of thought, spirituality, religion, and worship. Article 30, Section 2.2 specifically protects indigenous people's cultural identity, their religious beliefs, spiritualities, practices, and customs. Article 30.2, Section 2.3 guarantees indigenous peoples the right to cultural identity, religious beliefs, spiritualities, practices, and customs, and their own worldview. Article 30, Section 2.7 protects indigenous peoples' collective intellectual property of their knowledge, sciences, and learning. And Article 98, Section 2 affirms that the state assumes cultural diversity as the essential basis of the plurinational communitarian state. Your reporting also violates other laws. Law number 45, the law against racism and all forms of discrimination, which prohibits discrimination based on religion, cultural identity, and ethnic origin. Law number 73, the jurisdictional demarcation law, which recognizes indigenous jurisdictional authority. Law number 1257, ratifying ILO Convention 169 on indigenous rights. See, when journalism crosses into illegal territory, it's no longer journalism, it's propaganda with a press badge. So let us be crystal clear. Your efforts to delegitimize KAILASA are a deliberate attempt to undermine indigenous sovereignty in Bolivia. By portraying indigenous leaders who engage with KAILASA as deceived or incompetent, you directly perpetuate colonial attitudes with all the finesse of a colonial governor declaring, "We know what's best for the natives." This serves one purpose: to limit indigenous self-determination and maintain control over indigenous territories and resources, with the subtlety of a neon sign flashing, "Colonialism is still here." Your actions have concrete consequences. Your irresponsible reporting has directly incited violence against our community, with the predictability of lighting a match in a room full of gas. Following such media publications, mobs, fueled by these false characterizations, have violently breached KAILASA's properties and physically threatened non-violent monks and nuns peacefully residing there. These are not hypothetical concerns. These are real human beings whose lives are endangered by your reckless words. While you've been busy declaring us fictional, KAILASA has been providing tangible humanitarian support to Indigenous communities worldwide. Humanitarian grants to over 100 Indigenous nations. Environmental sustainability and forest conservation programs. Education, healthcare access, and food security initiatives. Billions of free meals served globally. It's quite an achievement for a figment of imagination. Apparently, our fictional aid has had very real impacts for communities that your reporting chooses to ignore, with the selective blindness of a referee at a home game. Now, more than 40 media outlets from 14 countries, including the Washington Post, MSN, The Week, Outlook magazine, and Dinamalar, have already removed similar defamatory content after recognizing their errors. They chose integrity. What will you choose? Continued embarrassment or professional dignity? We demand the following of Ahora El Pueblo. Retract your misleading articles with the same enthusiasm you showed in publishing them. Seek direct input from KAILASA representatives. Include perspectives of Indigenous leaders who have engaged with KAILASA. Acknowledge the legal basis for Indigenous nations' rights to conduct international relations, and publish this response in full. For a publication serving local communities, we suggest you consider which communities you actually serve. If it is truly all communities, including Indigenous Hindu communities, you'll correct your errors and commit to higher standards faster than you can say journalistic integrity. KAILASA will continue to exist and serve humanity whether you acknowledge us or not. Our treaties remain valid. Our humanitarian work continues and our ancient traditions endure. Your opinion on our existence alters reality about as much as declaring gravity optional. The world is watching. History has a long memory, and truth doesn't need your endorsement any more than the sun is permission to shine. So what will you choose?